front in the introvert spot with my back to you, so it's fun to see your smiling faces. I also wanted to thank Yolanda and all the folks at the retreat a couple weeks ago for giving me an opportunity to do something a little different with the church and to play some rock and roll and reggae and country and all the other weird mix of tunes that my little band plays. When my band played the church retreat 2 years ago, I posted a comment on Facebook about worlds colliding. I wondered what would happen when I brought together these two separate groups from my life. The band who rarely had heard me speak, and the church who believed that I rarely had an unexpressed thought. It made me realize how much I compartmentalize my life. I have different places that I go and different roles that I play, and usually I keep these roles in places very neatly separated from one another. On the whole, I found the collision of worlds smashing good fun. The church seemed to have fun, the band definitely had fun, and while I got a little more self-conscious and excited and flubbed all my solo parts more than usual, I had a really fabulous time. My Facebook status after playing the first retreat a year ago was, because it was a church retreat, the bass player wore a tie. Because there was a band, the church formed a conga line. This year at the retreat, we ditched the tie, and everybody seemed to be a little more comfortable cutting loose from the very get-go. Looking back on the newsletter at the retreat pictures and seeing the brilliant grins on people's faces at the dance really just looked like it just brought back the joy of that time. And I realized sometimes it's a pretty good thing to decompartmentalize. Last week, I had just started working on a good motivational social justice sermon based on the Isaiah text for today. And I came to church and heard Joe Hoffman preach a great motivational social justice sermon. And I thought, well, I don't want to do the same thing. That would be redundant. I felt like we had checked off a little box in one compartment of our faith life, and that I should therefore, in my preaching this week, move on to a different compartment today. I didn't think exactly in those terms, but I did slide right into one of my traditional ways of thinking about church. Church is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. One or the other. Most sermons by this philosophy do one or the other. And Joe had given us a really good poke last week and encouraged us to leave our comfort zones and be willing to fall on our fannies in order to make a difference in the world. So I thought, well, maybe it's my turn then to do some nice pastoral care. And at a glance, as I looked at the Isaiah text, I thought, well, the first half talks about feeding the hungry and satisfying the needs of the afflicted. But the second half of the Isaiah passage talks about Sabbath. I thought, okay, Sabbath, rest, self-care, me time. I'll just move to the second half of the text and go from there. And I think we do think this way sometimes, both individually and as a church community. We work at justice and doing things for others, and we work at nurturing our own spirits and healing our own wounds. They're both churchy tasks, both crucial to our vision of how we operate as a church community. I heard one of my favorite quotes just recently, probably in a sermon here. E.B. White saying, "When I wake up in the morning, I can't decide whether to enjoy the world or improve the world. That makes it difficult to plan the day." Since Joe had preached last week about improving the world, I decided I would preach on enjoying the world. So I sat down and started working with the Isaiah text. And anybody who has ever preached, and that's about half this congregation, knows that when you come with a plan to a text, the text tends not to cooperate. The text refused to compartmentalize. The biblical text threw everything together and mixed it all up in inconvenient ways. It did talk about the nurturing of spirits and the healing of wounds. Isaiah says, God will guide you continually and satisfy your needs in parched places. and make your bones strong. And you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters never fail. The problem was that these promises were presented not as the result of some nice Sabbathy time, some me time, but instead those promises were linked as the result of feeding the hungry and comforting the afflicted. It didn't help me at all to focus on the second part of the text, the part about Sabbath. Instead of a nice Sunday afternoon nap, it offered a conditional statement. If you refrain from trampling on the Sabbath, from pursuing your own interests on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight, and the holy day of God honorable, if you honor it, not going your own ways, serving your own interest, or pursuing your own affairs, then you shall take delight in God, and I will make you ride on the heights of the earth. When you put them together, the social justice half of the text sounds like a spa treatment, and the Sabbath portion sounds like work. Many of us have either memories of or heard stories of the not-too-distant past when Sabbath was a time where you did not play cards or play games or do anything that was any fun. You just sat still and rested. And you got in trouble if you shopped or giggled or did anything not, appropriate for Sunday. People took it very seriously only a few years ago that you were not to pursue your own interest on Sunday. I've never heard anybody speak fondly of those memories. So I'm not going to stand up here and recommend that we go back to what most folks remember as a fairly joyless way to spend a Sunday afternoon. But I do think it pays for us to reflect on what it means to go our own ways, serve our own interests, pursue our own affairs. What would it mean as part of Sabbath to take a rest from our own relentless self-interest? As I was pondering this question, a friend happened to share an article, and it's actually something that has bounced around for a while, about how Time magazine uses different covers in the United States than in Europe and Asia and the South Pacific. Time magazine, for a given week, will, in the rest of the world, have covers talking about revolutions and government changes in other countries and the world economy. On the very same week in the United States, it will hit the stands in the United States with feature cover stories like why anxiety is good for you, or why mom liked you best. It's embarrassing, really. Time magazine quietly operates under the understanding that most Americans have only a vague interest in the life and death concerns and struggles of the rest of the world, and an unlimited fascination with gazing at our own navels. As we continue to compartmentalize self-interest in its own box, separate from justice, ecology, and compassion, we continue to delude ourselves into thinking that our interests can actually be teased apart from the interests of others. So what happens when we begin to think of our responsibility to the world and our own self-care not as separate interests, but as deeply interlocking aspects of the same whole? You can tell people who have begun to realize this very overlap of concerns, people who get a personal recharge out of making things right, out of making things better. Folks who get the kind of endorphin surge from donating time or money or doing good deeds or changing some minds that others of us get from eating pie or getting a mani-pedi. We see them here in our own church every week, all enthusiastic and excited and reinvigorated because they're making the world a better and more just place. We see it too in the people who take time for reflection and rest, but who use that renewal time to get refocused and recharged. It really doesn't hurt for Isaiah to remind us that Sabbath is not just the absence of work. Sabbath is the presence of the holy, a time out of our busy march through life to remember that there's someone larger than ourselves, a God who demands not just prayer and worship, but also care for the world and its people. Without Sabbath, we become exhausted and burned out, unable to muster the strength to put on our capes to save the world. We become overwhelmed by the world's constantly growing need, by the headlines that do slip through the media to alert us to the world crying out in pain. And without justice work, we become the people that Time magazine thinks we are. Big babies, focused only on our own comfort and entertainment and amusement. Isaiah tells us something different. Isaiah teaches us that it's only when we break down the compartments within our religious life that we live like springs of water, whose waters never fail. So, the easy part. Now all we have to do is figure out how to mix it all together. And I've only got one more page left, so you're going to have to figure a lot of this out for yourself. I started trying to figure this out, how you mix the Sabbath and the social justice together, and I spent a lot of time thinking about the middle way. Goes back to Aristotle, talking about I'm probably going to say this wrong because I read it, not heard it, the via media, the middle way. I'll say it in English, middle way, with authority. Seeking, and this is old, this is Greek, it goes back to ancient philosophy, talking about a life of moderation, kind of in the middle, not going to extremes. There's also a nice large chunk of Buddhism that talks about the middle way, and talks about the fact that true enlightenment is somewhere between asceticism and luxury, sort of this middle path. And so I spent a lot of time kind of thinking about this, and then I realized, well, look what I'm doing. I'm putting the gulf in the middle again. I'm compartmentalizing. This goes over here, this goes over here, and we're in the middle. And it's not that we're supposed to keep some sort of balance between these things. Isaiah instead is telling us that these aren't two separate focuses or foci, is that right, Cousin? Thank you. But instead a reminder that it's all part of the same messy ball of wax. So perhaps the challenge this week is to look for the ways in which lives of social action and justice water our gardens and repair our streets, make our bones strong. The challenge is perhaps to look at the way our times of rest and renewal help swing our attention back to that which is outside ourselves, larger than ourselves, of which we are but a small part. Perhaps the challenge is to break down our compartments, to let the different aspects of our faith lives mingle together, and to find in the process that the music is louder, the smile is brighter, the conga line longer when we let it all mix together. Amen.
Amen.